1 second. Yeah, I mean, it's the big question, and in a certain sense, I sort of deliberately want to refuse to answer it in the book, but I think I can say a bit more about that might be potentially useful. I mean, I really didn't want to sort of do a laundry list where you're like, okay, these are the things you should spend your life on, because as you say, like, everybody's different. I think that a lot of this, firstly, I think people know the answer more in general, more for themselves, more than they realize, and that what happens in actually is not that they haven't found the answer yet, but that this whole set of ideas about getting everything done and being productive and being in control of your time and getting your life sorted out just sort of gets in the way. So in a way, one purpose of my book, if it's working, I suppose, might be to help clear that fog, so that once you're like, okay, I'm obviously not going to do 99% of the things that would be great to be able to do in life. So which ones am I actually going to do? And then for me, when I take myself through that sort of introspective process, it sort of does get a bit clearer that you sort of see that there are these kind of middling priorities that I talk about in the book that are kind of very seductive. It's very seductive to sort of put a bit of effort into nurturing friendships that you sort of care about, when actually it's very clear that there are probably a handful of people in your life who you really care about and want to be putting the energy into. Or if you have this level of freedom over your work, I know not everyone does, to take on projects that are sort of somewhat interesting and maybe fairly useful, to the detriment eventually of really being able to give your time to the things that sort of excite you the most and that mean the most to you. But yeah, as Louise was saying, there are these questions in the back of the book that are sort of, I think, are kind of useful and been useful for me as sort of navigational tools. I'm not going to do a good job of remembering all 5 of them right now, but they are things like, you know, where in your life are you waiting to do something that matters to you until you feel like you know what you're doing, like you've got the qualifications and you're in command of the material? Because that's, I think, a very common way in which people sort of put things off that they could start in on now, because they think that everyone else is much more qualified than them, and that's usually just, I think, because they don't hear everyone else's internal monologues of self-doubt. And another one is, you know, something like, where in your life are you still are you still focused on trying to become the person you think you ought to be instead of the person that you are? Again, you know, all sorts of people laboring for many years under sort of parental expectations, even long after their parents are no longer on the scene, societal expectations, or the idea that it would be inappropriate for them to pursue certain passions and desires. And then just finally, I know I shouldn't go on and on and on in response, but there is this question that I quote elsewhere in the book from James Hollis, a Jungian psychotherapist whose work has meant a very large amount to me personally, who suggests asking about big life choices and career paths and things like that. Not is this choice going to make me happier, or is this direction in life going to make me happier, but will this choice enlarge me or diminish me? It's very hard to know what's going to make us happy. Plenty of psychological research showing we're terrible at predicting accurately what makes us happy. But this idea of enlargement, sort of, for me anyway, it sort of connects to this question of growth and of something sort of generative and creative in the path that you're taking. And it's really useful because, you know, you can be having difficulty in a relationship, say, and you can know, I think, in response to that question, whether they are the kind of difficulties that are making you into a bigger person and a better partner, and it's worth weathering them, or whether it's the kind of difficulties that show you're in a terribly toxic relationship that's, you know, killing you slowly from the inside and you ought to get out of it. You can tell in a job whether a job that you're not really enjoying at the moment, you're not enjoying it because it's all part of a sort of edifying process of growing and getting better, or whether you're not enjoying it because it's just not you. So I find that kind of question, the thing about enlargement, really helpful to sort of tell the difference, because you can't just go by what's pleasurable and what's not pleasurable, because scrolling through Twitter and drinking large amounts of gin are pleasurable to me, but it's not, it's not a recipe for a full, meaningful life.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jing, and I'll share with you all in the group later the 5 exact questions, one of which I will just read out for you, Oliver, which I found particularly useful. How would you spend your days differently if you didn't care so much about seeing your actions reach fruition? Which I think is a super question to ask yourself. So Priyanka, I'd like to bring Priyanka in next, who's interested in asking about meeting our potential. Priyanka, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello.
Hi, Priyanka.
Hello. So the question you asked is actually stemming from an article I read earlier this week. It was shared with me by someone. It's on an ancient Indian philosophy, somewhat lost now. And it spoke of the concept that there is no free will. Everything is predetermined. And the karmic system is nonsense. So there is no past life, future life. Everything you do has a reaction in this current life, and that is about it. Being a liberal, I thought like the reading about lack of free will would, just be like, sense of control gone, would make me feel stressed out. But after I read that entire philosophy piece, I was like, whoosh, that's such a relief. So it's kind of stemming from there, and then from a lived experience. So when the brain fog goes on post-COVID or whatever, I've read a lot of articles and lived experience. The concept of time switches. There is no concept of time. Like the day before, you don't remember because you don't have the cognitive energy to. It's almost like time disappears. So every day is like a new start. So you're all fresh all over again. And these have just been 2 very interesting pieces, and it kind of removed stress and negative energy kind of from life. But like, I wanted to ask you what you think about this concept of time and stress and the karmic system, and like in your research and experiences, how does one remove these negative stressors, because the stressors can be good as well, from your life and reach one's potential? Yeah, that's about the question.
Just a little question. Yeah. Wow, I'm not sure I can give a sort of comprehensive answer to all the different things you touched on there, but I mean, the free will stuff fascinates me too. I wrote a long piece for The Guardian. I think you're talking about a different article, not one by me, but the one that I wrote, one just sort of getting at some of the same points, right? And interviewing a bunch of philosophers who do believe that we have no free will and literally everything that happens was predetermined since the Big Bang or the start of the universe, or alternatively has an element of randomness in it. But either way, you're not calling the shots. And I too have that strange relief reaction. Most people who consider the absence of free will think it's terrifying, but I'm like, I'm off the hook. It's like no one can criticize me for all the things I failed to do yesterday, because I was never going to do any more of them. And my potential is exactly what I live, and I will meet my potential, because whatever I do will be my potential, whether it's impressive to others or not. I'm trying to think where that sort of touches in on all this. I have to say I did not get into the free will debate in this book, because it threatens to sort of undermine literally everything else if you suddenly say, well, you've got no choices anyway, so whatever. But I do think that okay, here's where it keys into this subject matter for me in a personal way, is that I think that relief reaction is more common among people who have tied a lot of their sense of self-worth to their productivity, and who sort of feel that if they can't say at the end of the day that they did a lot of things, then they haven't quite justified their existence on the planet. They haven't quite, they're not quite in good standing with the cosmos, whatever religious or non-religious system you're going to slot that all into. And so I think you can go sort of two different ways with it. You can go and you can say that, like, well, what if we have no free will? There's no point doing anything, or I don't have any choice whether I do anything anyway. It's like dizzying and totally messes up your mind. Or you can have this very culturally reinforced notion that you're going to sort of do extraordinary things and somehow sort of exceed the rules of being human. You're going to be, if you really try hard, you can do things that would otherwise be complete, or that would be impossible. And I just think there's something very nice in the middle ground about saying that, all you ever can, if we have any choice at all in our actions, and I think we probably have to proceed on a moment-to-moment basis as if we do, all you can ever do is make a choice about the next thing you're doing. Even if you have amazing plans, your whole year mapped out, all you're really doing with that plan is acting from moment to moment in a specific way. And towards the end of the book, I close it with this line from Jung that has been adopted in a certain form into Alcoholics Anonymous as well, 12-step programs, which is just this idea of doing the next right thing. This idea that in AA, it's like if you're in a crisis, all you need to focus on is doing the next right thing. But actually, it's all any of us can ever focus on all the time, right? The only power you ever really have in the moment is to do what seems like the best thing to do next. And I always find that a huge liberation. I don't think I could truly live as if there were no free will, even if there isn't. But you can live as if these grand future schemes don't really exist, and that all you have to do is narrow your focus of vision and say what makes sense next. I find that very empowering, and I assume that it's because it's the only way to proceed. It's the only way for me to realize whatever potential is on the cards for me to realize.
Thank you so much, Oliver. We always have fantastic questions from Priyanka. So thank you so much, Priyanka.
Thank you.
And the next best thing that I can do is to bring in Sparky with his question. Are you still with us, Sparky?
Yes, I am.
Great, you're welcome. Please join us.
Yeah, so my question was trying to sort of synthesize all of this and maybe imagine what is it like to take these recommendations and what does that do for my life. And so while we've talked about how values and meaning are different for everyone, and so in some sense this will be by necessity a reductive question, but could you give an example, maybe from your own life, or a hypothetical of sort of a before and after of what one's life might have been like in typical, modern society, and then what the better experience would be after incorporating these recommendations?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, and it puts me sort of on alert that I'm always very, very keen to emphasize that I don't think I've sort of undergone some total transformation so that I live in a sort of this the state that Heidegger calls being toward death, in total acceptance of my mortality and all the rest of it. I think that the shift is certainly much more gradual and subtle and things like that, but it gets very, very hard to talk about because I think it is ultimately a sort of emotional shift. I mean, is it maybe most sensible to just talk from in my own life and in an incredibly sort of down to earth sort of way, sort of not sort of
yeah, I didn't mean to build it up too much. That
no. I mean,
nirvana at the end of it.
No. I mean, hopefully that's the portal to getting to some of these bigger things. I mean, as for pretty much anybody who becomes a parent, I think becoming a parent was a big part of this as well. But I think just sort of life experience gets you there to some extent as well. I think my attitude towards planning is an interesting, maybe an interesting one to think about. And different people's attitudes towards planning. I feel, as I say in the book, I come from a family of compulsive planners, you know, people who like leave 10 hours to get to the airport because it will be so terrible to miss the plane, and then you don't get any less stressed. You're just constantly stressed about the next thing once you get to the airport. You know, there's a plane to leave in time and all the rest of it. And I think that there's a way of viewing planning that is very common and today that essentially takes it as an attempt to control the future from the vantage point of the present. So in other words, you might, on a personal level, you might draw up your schedule for the day, and then to any degree to which life intervenes in a way that disrupts your schedule is like a failure. And you might sort of reluctantly accept some failures because you're realistic, but it's still a suboptimal day when the little plan that you wrote out in your expensive leather-bound journal or whatever, when they attempt to impose that on unfolding reality, doesn't perfectly come through. And then there's the way of thinking about planning that I think I've certainly sort of gradually felt my way into, and that there's this is embodied by this line from the American meditation teacher Joseph Goldstein, that we forget that a plan is just a thought, right? We think of our plans as these attempts to control the future from the present. In fact, they are just present moment statements of intent. And then you can plan the day in a completely different spirit, right? You can do it in quite a detailed fashion. You can put a lot of thought into it if you want to, if that's your personality. But the relationship that plan and you have to time as it unfolds is a totally different one. It's a one where the plan is useful to determine an action, to determine what is the next right thing to do. But the idea that when all the other people and forces that co-create reality do their thing in a way that you were unable to predict, the idea that something's gone wrong at that point is no longer present. I don't know if that's helpful. I feel like the way I approach planning is a sort of key way in which I have unclenched the grip of attempted control over time in a way. But I don't know, that might or might not resonate with other people.
Does make a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Sparky. It certainly seems to have taken Oliver to another level altogether. So, Steve,
A
would
weird
you like
kind
to
of
join
therapy.
us?
It's a group. It's a different kind of group therapy where it's the therapists who are the group, and I'm like.
Well, it's lovely. Steve, yes, you had not exactly a question to put to Oliver, more a sort of statement. Steve, would it? Are you still with us, Steve?
Just unmuting. Hi, hi,
Great.
Oliver. I just wanted to say thanks very much. I've not been on the book club Saturday meetings as regularly, but when I saw that you were advertised to come on, I said, I just wanted to say thanks very much, because your column, this column, will change your life. It really did change my life because of some of the—
It's supposed to be a joke. Oh wow. Anyway, I'm glad to hear it.
I mean, some of the recommendations you made with books, I believe, I can't say them all, but I believe you might have recommended. I mean, I also got your earlier books, right? The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking, and I believe you had recommended Happy Ever After by Paul Dolan. You may have
I reviewed that for The Guardian a while ago. Yeah.
You may have recommended The Biggest Bluff by Maria Konnikova. You may have also recommended How to Decide by Annie Duke. Perfectly Confident by Dawn Moore. But the one I like a whole lot which seems to be what your new book is speaking to, was Sven Brinkman's Stand Firm and the Joy of Missing Out. So I just wanted to say thanks, that the joy of missing out, it's something that I've always thought about, because, I was kind of like that bookish kid who just missed out on a lot of stuff, And it's like, your work speaks also to me to the work of Susan Cain's Quiet, and a very early work by Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death.
Yeah.
When you talk about, art, just because he used this term, the existential dilemma.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say thanks very much. And your column did change my life. And I wish you lived nearby. We could have gone down to the pub and,
Well, thank you so much. And those authors are like excellent company to be in. So I'm really grateful.
Thanks for your recommendation.
Thanks so much, Steve, and thanks for joining us, and thanks for giving a fantastic rundown of some really, really great books. Funny you suddenly rattled all those out, because I'd just leant back to pull this one out, which I think is quite a good compliment to your book, Oliver.
Yeah, I haven't read it, and I feel bad that I haven't read it, because you're not the first person. You're not the first person to tell me.
Enjoy it. You'd really enjoy it. Now, we've just time to bring in Joanne with her question. Joanne, are you still with us?
Yes, thanks, Louise.
Hi, Joanne.
Great talk, Oliver. And there's just it reminds me, listening to you, of how much, of so much I've got to read. So I'm getting this time pressure of like, I really need to catch up on my reading. But anyway,
you'll never do it. There'll be so many books left by the time when you reach the end of your life. Yeah.
But I was just wondering, just a quick question: is there any particular culture or nation that has it cracked, has the right balance, or is it all like individuals within cultures either have it cracked or haven't, like this whole management of time and the experiencing the moment while also, investing in the future and future happiness and well-being? Has anybody, or is it so dependent on other, as you briefly mentioned about, like, the whole socioeconomic factors that can determine a lot about our happiness and well-being? Or over to you. What is there any particular, as I say, nation, culture, society that seems to have it cracked?
It's an interesting question that comes up a bit, and there has been really interesting work on like the different tempos of different cities around the world and different attitudes to punctuality is the famous one. All these sort of stories of like uptight North American university professors going on secondments to in South America and getting very confused by how people are thinking about scheduling meetings and things like that. It's there's obviously huge differences. I consider myself sort of moderately well-traveled, but I don't think I have the sort of depth of experience, and I didn't focus in this book on a big sort of cross-cultural thing. So I mean, what is there to say? There may be a handful of sort of uncontacted indigenous groups who are living in sort of pure task orientation, who, by their own standards, have things worked out in that way. On the other end of the scale, a lot of the paths of the research that I did led to, perhaps this is a little bit predictable, but led to Scandinavia, in the sense that the certain kinds of communal rhythms and communal traditions, like the tradition in Swedish offices called the fika, where everyone stops and has a coffee break at the same time every afternoon all together, and you sort of lose a bit of the freedom to decide exactly when to have your coffee break. But the upside is of losing that kind of control is actually very positive for the quality of life of the people in the organization. There's a lot of work out of Scandinavia too, about of course called collective restoration, the fact that people in a given country seem to be a lot happier and seem to enjoy their holidays a lot more when more people in that country are on holiday at the same time. So that sort of French tradition of the grand vacances seems to really deliver happiness benefits. And I mean, I think, you know, I don't know that I could sort of say one culture has it sorted out. I can think about like the places I've been where I've felt the sort of sense that like that sort of life is moving at the speed of reality somehow. They tend to be sort of more rural places. I think of West Cork, might be familiar based on some accents I'm hearing in this conversation, might be familiar to some people here, or the North York Moors where we just moved. But you know, there's a little bit of a difficult claim, right? Because there are well, firstly, I tend to be on some kind of sabbatical or holiday when I'm in those places, and so I'm poor as an observer. And then secondly, you know, it might just be a pace of life issue that is not quite the same as saying people have got the philosophy of time worked out. I think small children have it worked out. Maybe that's the answer. Sort of, I think 1-year-olds have a good attitude.
Thanks, Joanne. And on that subject, I would like to just bring in our very last person to put a question to you, because talking about the people who have it sorted, Shankar, if you're still with us, Shankar tells me he has spent the last 20 years living in the mountains and doing whatever he feels like, and he has some comments. So it sounds like Shankar would be the perfect person to wrap up this event. Are you still with us, Shankar?
I am, yes.
Shankar, all right. You're very welcome. You've finished your walk and you're back in your home now. So as I said, I think your comments might be the perfect way to wrap up the event.
So yeah, I miss some of the more recent comments, but I found the discussion on free will quite interesting, because that's something that I've been considering a lot over the last 20 years. And my observation is that I think there's also been some discussion around meaningfulness and values and things like that. And you know, there's a lot of this kind of messaging that you need to reassess and you need to step back and not feel like you're pushing too hard. And, you know, just be conscious of that the decisions that you take are decisions that are in the now, and your values may change and your values may evolve. And, you know, you may be taking decisions that make being integrated with certain parts of society more difficult. And certainly the most important thing being that piece about meaningfulness and your values evolving as you go into this journey of looking at what it is you really want and what direction you really want to take. So I think that, you know, it will inevitably go hand in hand with some sort of diving into yourself, and whether that's attractive or not, and whether you frame that in terms of spiritual evolution or trauma work or whatever, your understanding of yourself will evolve as you open yourself to not being corralled and not being a slave to the training that we all get as in terms of time management in school, in terms of objective focus in school and all of those things. So I just wanted to raise that as someone who hears a lot of this kind of self-development pushing in both directions, either pushing in the direction of positivity or pushing in the direction of stepping away from, you know, 4-hour working week, or stepping away from the traditional ways of looking at society and time and ourselves, and just, you know, flagging that, you know, your reactions to stuff now are a product of the conditioning that you've been through up to now, and you're really liberating yourself to understand your conditioning better and to embrace whatever conditioning you want better. And that can be a difficult process sometimes. So sorry, it wasn't really a question.
No, that's great. I'd much rather just hear that than try and respond. No, yeah, it's great.
That's great.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Shankar. Maybe Oliver will write an article about you later on. So,
If you don't mind sharing, which mountains do you live in? You said you live in the mountains.
I'm in the Alps. I'm actually in Chamonix.
Wow.
So not that far from the UK. You can
Yeah.
probably hear I've got a UK accent. And yeah, I mean, yeah, genuinely, there are trials that go with this. It's not all sunshine and rainbows when you step onto that alternative journey.
Yeah.
There are trials, and certainly integrating the society can become difficult if you've got different values from the accepted ones.
thanks for sharing that so much, Shankar. And thank you very much, Oliver, for joining us today. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you for everything you've contributed. Thank you to all of our members for joining us and for putting your superb questions to Oliver. And I just finally hand back to Prakash, who will close the event. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. Thanks everyone for joining in with your questions. Thank you so much, Oliver, for giving us your time. It just so happened I forgot to record the first half of the conversation, but somehow I'm not feeling
I can't
bad.
remember it and do it again, I'm afraid. No.
Yeah, so we're going to have to start all over again, Oliver.
But I'm not feeling bad about it, given the discussion that we're having. There is this entire pressure on us to catch up, do this, do that, all the time. So maybe it's a sign from the universe that, you know what, you guys need to relax a bit. It's okay, the first half is recorded, second half is. Before we go, I wanted to share this thing which I found reading Oliver's articles. So the Latin word for free time or leisure, it's called, I think, otium, O-T-I-U-M. And so business in Latin is negotium or negotium, right? The opposite, or lack of free time or lack of leisure.
Not leisure, I
Not
think so.
leisure, yeah. So it was a very interesting realization that, which I found reading in Oliver's articles, that originally when you were looking at work, at business, it was interpreted as not leisure or the absence of leisure, right? When you listen to this entire conversation, one of the key takeaways, I think, for all of us is the stress that comes in when you look at these tools which promise to liberate you from stress in the first place. So there is a certain lack of leisure definitely happening out here. It also seems like, I think this is something for us to figure out in our own journeys. What is the balance of productivity tool? And when you reach a stage and say, you know what, I think this is where I need to chill, without using words which hurt ourselves. Like, I'm really bothered about the word we're going to use, saying, this is my downtime or non-productive time, which makes me feel I am not being good right now.
Right.
There's the dissonance out there. You all want to be good. So I think there's a lot of work or a possibility out there with the words. Oliver, thank you so much for opening up this world for us. I think it's a lovely break for us here to pause and say, well, wait a minute. Are we trying to become so super efficient using behavioral science and tools and hack that we have forgotten just to have a moment to break and understand what things are really important? Before you go, any last parting advice, any suggestion, anything for us, Oliver?
I think you just did it so well. I've basically got nothing to add. Yeah, it is about the question of what is enough. What is enough for you to feel like you are living meaningfully, or that you're fulfilling your potential, or whatever those standards are for you. And I think, maybe I'm speaking maybe I'm going to sort of talk about something in a way that reveals my own particular issues and hang-ups and neuroses here, but I think it is about, as well, sort of beginning each day, if possible, with a little bit more of the feeling that, like, you've already justified your existence on the planet just by existing, and any work you do and things you accomplish, that's great, and then we all want to do that with our lives, but not because you sort of have to meet a certain level, otherwise you're sort of inadequate as a human being. You sort of start off in credit, as it were, and you don't have to be productive in order to justify your existence. You just have to be productive because it's fun and good and useful to produce things sometimes in life.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Our next guest is Fatima, and Fatima is going to have a fantastic time with us. We'll have a fantastic time with her because we are going to find out about behavioral science and the Middle East, and that's something totally new for us, just like this session was. Please stay safe, wear your masks. If you haven't got your vaccinations, please get them. If you have not, I think that's cool too. I think someone was saying that maybe that's nature's way of keeping some sort of insurance on the species, in case things mess up 10 years down the line. You guys have the responsibility of carrying on the human species on your shoulder. We guys will be gone. So everything is all right. Have a good time. Enjoy your shots, and have a good time, y'all.
Thank you very much, guys. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.